Hey guys, breaking down more baits and techniques, and today I'm going over the Squarebill Crankbait. So what is the point, what is the purpose of a Squarebill Crankbait? Why would you use it? So the role of a Squarebill Crankbait like these is to cover a lot of shallow water, hard structure. And when I say shallow water, I'm talking about 2 to 4 feet of depth. Once you get into like 5+ feet of water, that's more of your mid-depth crankbait. This is a shallow water crankbait, so 2 to 4 feet of water is what you're looking for. And then when I say hard structure, I mean either wood, rocks, or a hard bottom. The bottom composition is the most universal piece of structure in any lake or pond. Every body of water has a bottom, obviously, and when you're fishing a Squarebill crankbait, you're looking for either like a sand bottom or a gravel or a clay, that harder bottom that's not really snaggy. You don't want to be fishing this in like a muddy or slimy or leafy bottom with a lot of debris everywhere, because if you have a lot of debris or mud along your bottom, the crankbait, when you're digging it around down there, it's just going to get coated in that stuff and be absolutely ruined. And the next point is you do want this bait digging into the bottom. You want this bait bouncing around the bottom, making as much contact with the bottom as possible. You want to cast it out there, reel it down to the depth, and have it bouncing around, looking erratic, looking natural, triggering a reaction strike. That's the presentation that this bait was designed for. Whether it's wood or rocks or just that hard bottom, you want it bouncing and deflecting all over the place. Now, the reason it works so well in that hard structure is because of obviously the square build design. The bills have a very wide, square-edged bill, and it helps it to bounce and deflect over stuff as opposed to just kind of rolling over and gliding over stuff. They actually kind of bounce away, and when it's coming over a piece of wood, it just keeps those hook points a little bit farther away from that piece of wood or that rock, and it really does make a huge difference, and you can fish this through pretty much all types of hard structure without snagging very much. Now, if you do want to snag even less, there are a few things you can do, because you're probably thinking it's a treble hook lure. There's no way I'm fishing that in wood, but there are a few things you can do to snag even less, namely when you're targeting wood. Sand bottom or rocks, you're never really going to snag anyway, so that's nothing to worry about. But when you're targeting that wood, snagging is obviously something to think about, and there are a few strategies to minimize it. Number one is going to be with your retrieve. Generally, your retrieve is to reel it down into the bottom, have it bouncing around with your rod tip pretty low. But as you're coming up to a piece of wood or a log or a branch, you want to kind of raise your rod tip up, slow down, and kind of worm it pretty slowly, pretty gently over that wood, much like you would a jig or a Texas rig or something. Pretty gently, just kind of glide it over that wood. The reason is, if you hammer it down, if you grind your crankbait in really fast into that piece of wood, it's going to dig in there and you're going to be more likely to snag. But if you just gently roll it over, kind of worm it over that piece of wood, the buoyancy, the floating property, and that bill are really going to be allowed to bump and float over the wood and just glide naturally over as opposed to snagging. So if you really don't want to snag, the best way to do it is to just, as you're coming over that piece of wood, raise your rod tip and kind of slow down, be very gentle with the bait. Now, another thing you can do is to choose short shank hooks to replace the treble hooks that come stock. With shorter shank, it's a bit expensive to replace all your hooks, but it does just raise the point of the hook closer to your bait, and the closer the point of the hook is to your bait, the farther it is from the wood, and the less you're going to snag. And lastly, one thing that I've been doing for a while and works really, really well is to take a pair of pliers and just bend in the hook points very, very slightly. You're not making circle hooks or anything. You're just taking the hook point and slightly bending it inwards. Again, it just separates the points of that hook from the wood or the rocks a little bit extra. You're going to snag less, and I have not found that you miss any additional bass with them bent slightly in. My hookup percentage is pretty much just the same, and I definitely notice I catch on less wood, and when I'm fishing around rocks, the hook points stay sharper for much, much longer. Now, when it comes to the retrieve, it's extremely simple. Like I said, you cast it out, reel it down to the bottom, and just bounce it along the bottom for pretty much the whole way. The only kind of difference I'll add here and there is I'll just give a quick stop of the reel so that it kind of floats up real quick, pauses, and then I'll get right back into it. It's just something a little bit different, a little bit more erratic. It might catch a bass's attention from a distance or something. So just pretty much, it's just a straight retrieve. Every once in a while, at a pause, or if you're coming over a piece of wood, like I discussed, slow it down a bit. But for the most part, it's a cast, chunk, and wind bait. Next, when it comes to the colors for these, they're extremely simple. Pretty much, there's going to be 3 categories. You have your bluegill categories, which is going to be some sort of green or orange, bluish. You don't need to be too specific. It's a pretty erratic bait. It's bouncing around. The bass aren't going to get a great look at it. As long as it has some sort of greenish or orangish hue, that's going to be your bluegill pattern. Then you have your shad patterns, which are either going to be a reflective one like this, kind of a chrome or silvery, shiny color like this. That's going to be your clear, sunny water shad imitation. Then you have like a white or chartreuse, something like this. It's much more bright. It's a solid bright color like a white or chartreuse or like a neon orange there. This is going to be like your muddy water shad imitation when the visibility is very low. You don't need a reflective shiny color, but a very bright solid white or chartreuse is very, very visible in that darker water. Then you have kind of your reds. This is probably what I fish the least, but during the early spring pre-spawn period when the water's real muddy, for whatever reason, red just works extremely well. So pretty much I limit it to either a red in that early spring period, shad imitations, which are either a chrome silvery color or a white chartreuse color. And then you have your bluegills, your greenish, orangish colors. So when are you going to fish a Squarebill crankbait? I found they work the best in the spring and fall months. You can fish them a bit in the earlier summer period or the earlier winter period. But for the most part, in the dead of summer and dead of winter, I just have found they don't work that well. Normally in the summer, there's just way too much grass up shallow. And then in the winter, it's just too aggressive, too much wobble, too aggressive for those winter bass that are kind of sluggish, kind of cold. They don't want to move all that fast. It's just too erratic, too much for them in the really, really cold water. But in the spring and fall, when bass are chasing bait, very aggressive, and they're more hunting, this bait is incredible all throughout the spring and fall. That's when I really, really throw this bait. And then when it comes to the water conditions, the only type of time I don't really want to use it is ultra clear water. As long as there's a little bit of stain, I'll fish it from a little bit of stain all the way to the muddiest water you can get. It has a ton of vibration, a lot of sound, it's bouncing around. It's super easy for those bass to find. So from the muddiest water to even a little bit stained is a phenomenal bait. Once you get ultra clear, it's just a little bit too aggressive, I've found. Normally with a little bit heavier line, the hook swinging around, the louder rattles, I feel like bass in ultra clear water are a little bit too picky and they don't eat a Squarebill as well. But as long as there's a little bit of stain in the water, it's a great choice. And then when it comes to the gear to fish a Squarebill crankbait on, I always fish it on a bait casting gear. I like a moderate to a moderate fast action rod. And then the line is usually a 12 pound fluorocarbon. That's what I like. But there's actually a technique, a Squarebill crankbait, that you can fish with monofilament if you want. It's one of the few times where mono is still perfectly viable. It has enough stretch, and since you're making short casts, the stretch isn't really a problem. So either 12 pound to 15 pound is about as high as I'll go. That 12 to 15 pound test, fluorocarbon or monofilament line on a bait casting setup is perfect. Alright guys, that's pretty much everything you need to know about fishing a Squarebill crankbait. So thanks for watching and feel free to subscribe if you want.